When it comes to all this talk of MK Ultra, mind control, electroshock, drug torture, mental splitting, and mind zombies, all of it can seem pretty unsettling and scary to the uninformed mind, which does not possess the knowledge of self. Yes, the horror methods and physical pain inflicted upon the victims can be scary indeed. But remember, the state of hypnotism mind control is produced through the natural mechanisms and instincts of our senses. Take the spookiness out of all knowledge which was distorted and sold back to you as so-called bad. That is the true game, the true test, and the true objective of all human beings in their war against the enemy. When I first learned of MK Ultra, it caused me to be so unsettled that I started crying. I never understood how deep slavery went and how God would even allow something so sinister to be possible in the first place. I had to take the emotions out of the shock caused by the empathetic pain for the victim. It was simply a pattern disruption in my belief system and what my brain had elusively imagined about the true reality of this world. This enabled me to come to my senses and allow my cognitive mind to reason that all things which are eerie, spooky, or complicated come with the simplest forms of correction. This is why the only way that the enemy can keep us blind to this fact is by way of repetition, through horror films, which are in actuality the distorted depictions of melanin culture and constant slave movies depicting the chattel state of oppression. Constant action movies which illustrate the horrors of the technology called MK Ultra are intentionally casted out to the world, including to children, to induce fear. False evidence appearing real. This is the perpetual subconscious state in which Black people live, because no matter how much any person of melanin may deny it, and the foundational Black American most particularly, we are always subconsciously aware of the sinister capabilities of white supremacy against us. This fear state is what literally blinds us from the slave state that we are in, which in turn causes our brain to fill in the blanks of the sense perception of our environment. The concept of simplistic correction will be elaborated on during episode 5, in which the 7 base composition of systems will be fully decoded. So, what is the simplest correction for a traumatically dissociated hypnotic slave mind? The answer is language. The magic of language. Speech is a supernatural phenomenon that sets humans apart from all other organisms. It allows us to express complex thoughts, share emotions, and communicate ideas that transcend time and space. With language, we can construct entire worlds from our imagination. The ability to convey abstract concepts is one of the defining traits of humanity, which enable cultural narratives and foster community connections. From a scientific perspective, language involves intricate patterns of sounds and meanings. The human ear is finely tuned to recognize frequencies and subtle variations, which are crucial for distinguishing phonemes, the basic units of sound that form words. The auditory system can process a vast range of pitches that give us the ability to discern emotional nuances in speech. This capability is deeply intertwined with our cognitive functions, where language shapes our thoughts and perceptions. In meditation, language repetition serves a vital purpose. The rhythmic chanting or recitation of mantras creates a calming frequency that resonates within the mind and body, which induces relaxation and focus. This repetition is what establishes a mental anchor, allowing for the decluttering of thoughts and a deeper state of awareness. The concept of God creating the world and humanity through His Word can be examined from both a spiritual and scientific perspective. In Christianity, the act of creation by God is described as taking place through divine speech where God says, "Let there be light." This exemplifies the profound connection between language and existence. It highlights the idea that language is a powerful force which can shape the fabric of matter itself, thus making speech and language a fundamental building block of reality. Each word carries a frequency or vibration that resonates with the universe. In a way, just as sound waves can create physical vibrations and shapes, words have the potential to manifest ideas and intentions into reality. The act of speaking something into existence taps into a deeper resonance of truth, where thoughts and words align to create the world around us. The science of frequency further elucidates this concept. Everything in the universe, including our thoughts and emotions, has a vibrational frequency. Quantum physics suggests that matter is fundamentally not solid, but rather a web of energy and frequencies. This is analogous to how sound waves travel through space and impacts everything they touch. Language, as a form of sound, interacts with the vibrations of the world to shape perceptions and experiences. At a fundamental level, our understanding of reality is mediated by language. The way we articulate our thoughts influences how we perceive ourselves and the world around us. Language shapes our beliefs, cultures, and interactions, reflecting and constructing our world. Just as divine words sparked creation, human language continues to evolve and impact the fabric of existence, intertwining with our thoughts, actions, and collective experiences. Thus, in essence, the concept of creation through language speaks to the profound relationship between sound, frequency, and the shaping of reality. Language possesses an extraordinary power, both spiritually and scientifically, that influences our experiences and allows us to participate in the ongoing act of creation. In the context of hypnotic mind control, hypnotism leverages the intricate relationship between language, frequency, and human consciousness. This process involves inducing a trance-like state that allows the hypnotist to bypass the subconscious and access deeper aspects of the mind, which makes the subject more open to mental suggestion. Understanding the science behind this process reveals how language can effectively influence thought and behavior. Both the structure and delivery of language is key to its pivotal role. Words can evoke emotional responses, paint vivid mental imagery, and create a narrative that guides a person into a relaxed state. The hypnotist uses carefully chosen phrases that are designed to resonate with the subconscious mind, so that he may bypass the critical thinking faculties that might challenge or reject the hypnotic suggestions. The clarity and simplicity of the language help create a focused mental state, conducive to suggestion. The concept of frequency is integral to understanding how hypnotism works. The human mind operates within different brainwave frequencies, each associated with various states of consciousness. For instance, beta waves are present during active, alert states. Alpha waves occur during relaxed but awake states, often seen in light meditation. Theta waves, commonly associated with deep relaxation and hypnotic states, enable access to the subconscious mind. The hypnotist often utilizes music, rhythmic speech patterns, or specific vocal tones to induce these desirable frequencies. The use of soothing voice modulation can create a calming atmosphere, encouraging the brain to shift into these deeper states. Induction techniques commonly employed in hypnotism include progressive relaxation, guided imagery, and direct suggestion. During these processes, the hypnotist uses language rhythms and tonal variations to facilitate relaxation. Repetitive phrases and soothing language help anchor the individual in a trance state. When the mind is in a receptive state, suggestions can be introduced, often framed positively to elicit change, such as a desire to quit smoking or reduce anxiety. Once the subject is in a hypnotic state, the subconscious mind becomes more pliable. Suggestions made during this phase can lead to the subject acting out behavioral commands. The effectiveness lies in the subconscious's acceptance of these suggestions, without the critical barriers set up by conscious thought. The interplay of language and frequency helps facilitate this process, and allows the subject to internalize and act upon the suggestions given. Ergo, the science of language and frequency-inducing hypnotism highlights the profound impact that structured words and rhythmic sounds can have on human consciousness. By understanding how these elements work together, hypnotism can effectively harness the power of suggestion to facilitate personal transformation and healing. Nevertheless, when considering the universal law of duality, we can understand that just as language is a key apparatus to induce hypnosis and trauma-based mind splitting, it is also, therefore, the key apparatus to deprogramming the hypnotic mind and addressing the root trauma which caused the dissociation. Just as specific phrases and suggestions can be used to induce a trance state, carefully chosen language can also facilitate awakening and reintegration. Therapeutic dialogue involves affirmations and narratives that encourage the subject to reevaluate their experiences and beliefs, helping to dismantle deeply entrenched patterns caused by the physical-emotional trauma. In this context, the use of compassionate, empathetic language is crucial, as it fosters a safe environment for healing. Practitioners may employ cognitive restructuring techniques, using clear and affirmative language to challenge distorted thoughts and perceptions that arise from dissociative states. By guiding individuals to articulate their feelings and experiences, the therapist helps them reclaim their narrative and self-awareness. Moreover, the rhythmic and soothing qualities of language can help ease the transition from a dissociative state to conscious awareness, allowing for a smoother re-engagement with reality. Ultimately, therefore, language serves as a bridge between the subconscious and conscious mind, which provides pathways for healing and restoring a sense of agency. In Chapter 3 of the book Transformation of America, author Weinstein detailed exactly how he saved the mind of MK Ultra victim, Kathy O'Brien. He states, quote, "Aside from my learned deprogramming skill, the balance of the formula I used consisted of elements which are actually rules of ethical therapy conduct. Those therapy rules were strictly enforced. Kathy understood and agreed that, in order for her to have absolute control of her mind, She must place total trust in me and the therapy regime. 1. I maintained a constant vigil to ensure Kathy's physical and psychological safety from all outside influences. 2. No memories could be verbalized by Kathy until after they were written by her. The only questions I could ask were history-oriented and directed to Kathy's presenting personality that was recovering the memory. Those questions could only address the who, what, when, how, and where of the memory. Even if I could have known the answers in advance, I could not inject. Our perceptions would have differed radically and could have created more memory barriers between personality fragments. 3. I fundamentally explained mind control to Kathy, and she then understood that what happened to her was not her fault. However, she understood she was becoming responsible for her actions here and now. Through therapy, she was asserting control over her own mind. 4. We devoted many hours to intellectual discussions of Kathy's learned religious beliefs, and they were logically debunked, just as if I were explaining how the illusions of a magician's tricks work to confuse reality. 5. No expression of emotion by Kathy would be permitted during the memory recovery and journaling process. I never asked her, "How does that make you feel?" This is as important as the safety issue for the rapid recovery of memories. End quote. Compare this with the auditing techniques of Dianetics. Number 1. It emphasizes the mental safety of the pre-clear, which is an individual undergoing the auditing process, who seeks to remove engrams and achieve a state of clarity free from the influences of past traumas by creating a supportive environment during auditing. The auditor must ensure that the pre-clear feels safe while recalling painful experiences. Number 2. During auditing, the auditor guides the pre-clear to recall and articulate memories while avoiding leading questions that might distort the process and tangle the engrams, which are mental recordings of traumatic or painful experiences stored in the reactive mind, which influence an individual's behavior and emotions unconsciously. 3. It focuses on alleviating guilt and helping the pre-clear understand that their past actions were influenced by engrams. 4. It engages the pre-clear in discussions that help them rationalize and debunk misconceptions or beliefs tied to their traumas, similar to refreshing the mind. 5. While emotions may arise during auditing, emphasis is placed on focusing through the experience and examining it rather than expressing emotion overly, as it can distract from the process. All of the deprogramming steps utilized by Mark Phillips to bring back the full memories of Kathy O'Brien align perfectly with the exact techniques and principles outlined by L. Ron Hubbard in his work, Dianetics, for mental healing. Trauma-based disorder is the true root of mental disease. Dianetic auditing, which releases and clears the traumatic engrams, is therefore the correction. This is precisely the reason why the enemy has gone to great lengths to discredit Hubbard's compilation of the science of mind as a pseudoscientific, cult-like religion. It is because Dianetics is the only route to truly clearing the mind of mental trauma. Not just learning how to live with it through coping mechanisms and comfort talk. While the term Dianetics is a coined term, Hubbard himself has stated that his science of mind was simply a compilation of Black Aboriginal science, which is natural. Therefore, Dianetics is not pseudoscience. It is Black science which is rooted in actual fact. Black Aboriginals have long studied the mind for eons of centuries, before Caucasians came onto the planet. The people who practice Dianetics are therefore not cult members who practice Scientology. They are free-thinking beings who do not succumb to the false propaganda of the enemy. While Scientology itself may or may not have its errors, placing the blanketed label of Scientology and cult-like religion on all the natural processes of mental auditing is a distortion of the enemy. Science and mathematics is based in fact, not religion or opinion. Scientology is a religion founded by L. Ron Hubbard in the early 1950s that is characterized by a belief system which emphasizes spiritual enlightenment and personal improvement through a series of teachings and practices. Central to Scientology is the idea that humans are spiritual beings, known as thetans, who are distinct from their minds and bodies. Auditing, on the other hand, is simply a natural mental technique aimed at helping individuals confront and overcome past traumas to achieve a state of clarity. Auditing is a system of natural science, while Scientology is a system of beliefs. This is the same trick, for example, in how the enemy claims that foundational Black Americans are a cult, while blatantly disregarding the fact that it is a genetic lineage based on the descendants of chattel slavery. Bloodlines and genetic lineages have nothing to do with beliefs or opinions. It is biological fact and physical reality. To prove the antiquity of the Aboriginal knowledge of the mind, there are even prehistoric depictions of mind control in the stone tablets of the Anunnaki. Ancient Aboriginals knew that the world would eventually be forced under the subjugation of hypnotic mind control, which means that they knew the science of trauma, as trauma is the primary apparatus to forced hypnotic mind control. If Black Aboriginals were the originators of mental science, then they were also, as stated, the originators of the first mental healing. This brings us to the story of Adam and Eve. In my humble interpretation, Eve, allowing the serpent to sway her into eating the apple from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, was the greatest sin of man and the most destructive sin. This is because the 7 base laws of nature, and the law of duality and polarity in particular, is the ultimate, fractally regenerative and multifaceted operating system of reality. The binary factor is multiplied and squared, which compounds the leverage for the system to produce infinite outputs of technical possibilities. Infinite dimensions, infinite perspectives, infinite outcomes, infinite language codes. Effectually, this produces infinite confusion and chaos in the world of carnal human beings. Although we are born with the genetic potential to reach the supernatural state of all-knowing, it is a state that is produced gradually over infinite eons and infinite lifetimes. Yet, having all knowledge, or thinking we do, produces an arrogant state of mind in which humans think that they can lead themselves and even others in a single lifetime, without the help of God himself. The Hermetic system of duality is the Eve system which grafted all other systems in the world. Natural systems, human thought systems, biological systems, technological systems, survival systems, technology systems. We cannot decode this infinite system ourselves, and we fear what we do not know. So this infinite confusion causes a very subtle, subconscious state of fear as we go about our lives. God knew that this would cause the smoking and shutting down of our optimal consciousness, which caused the smoke and mirror illusion to be cast onto our perception, as he is the only one capable of discerning the infinite matrices of data points. Although the serpent was subtle in his suggestion for Eve to eat the apple, it was still an act of free will on the part of Eve. But God knew that once the limited mind of man absorbed the overstimulative amount of knowledge data, our minds would fall unwillingly susceptible to the hypnotic suggestion of the enemy, and that we would be gradually reduced to the state of mental puppets and slaves at the mercy of Satan's commands and will. Thus, we quite literally fell into fleshly carnality. Human chattel chained to the bonds of Satan's desires, along with our own desires, which are the false desires of the serpent that was casted onto us the moment that Eve bit the apple of infinite knowledge. Thus, the underlying lesson of many superhero movies in which the hero squares off with a power-hungry villain is to never seek too much power or to think that we know all. The carnality of our minds, which cannot ultimately discern true data from false data in the compounding nature of dual knowledge and language, will never allow you to sustain it. Ergo, the villain almost always goes psychologically mad and mentally slave to the overstimulative dynamics of his own perception. Power is the electric voltage in a system. Overvoltage always leads to smoke, which, when abundant enough, completely covers the site of the actual machine. Electricity is a form of light. Knowledge produces more light in the brain. Taking in new knowledge produces new neural pathways in the brain, along with melanin spiritual frequency in the pineal gland. Excessive false data going against the grain of the melanin brain means the eventual death of that HUE man, because he cannot perceive the true image of this machine called reality. Physical darkness always leads to madness. As James 1 verse 8 says in the Bible, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. In the book titled The Kundalini Experience, Lee Sanella says, quote, upon arriving there, the Kundalini is said to give rise to the mystical state of consciousness, which is indescribably blissful and in which all awareness of duality cease. End quote. It is therefore duality, and the binary confusion of language and information that is the root to all dis-ease and disorders. It is the root to producing Satan's slave state as compared to the God state of mind. When it comes to trauma and shock, not only is there the factor of our minds falling susceptible to hypnotic suggestion, but there is also the factor of our brains imaginatively filling in the gaps of what it cannot see, based on the data it already has. Thus, we have a triune state of hypnotic suggestion, hallucination, and delusion. This is the false mathematical application of the enemy. He has replaced the natural triune state of melanin spirit, soul, and mind-body in the human, which is what enables the melanin apparatus of the brain to be attuned to the frequency of the metaphysical realm. Being attuned to the metaphysical means being attuned to the spiritual realm and enabling ourselves to be susceptible only to the whisper commands of God. Melanated humans are born with the natural inclination to submit to the will of God, which means submitting to and aligning ourselves with his ultimate truth and concrete reality. God gave us our natural state of hypnotic suggestion to himself, by placing in us the divine DNA of himself, and then fractally applying his DNA through generations of ancestral memory. The enemy took this same apparatus and tuned it, meaning he overstimulated it, to produce his own pseudo-human called nigga. Thus, the three-dimensional God state of mind is 1. Spirit, metaphysical and spiritual suggestion by God. 2. Soul, subconscious mental suggestion by God. And 3. Mind, optimal cognitive functioning, conscious submission, obedience, and alignment to God's truth, nature, and ultimate reality. The 3D slave state of the enemy therefore entails 1. Suggestion, active disobedience to nature, due to the unconscious loss of physical and psychological will. 2. Hallucination, blindness to physical reality and objective truth, due to the false veil of perception over the eyes. 3. Delusion, arrogance due to the false perception of thinking you have the truth of what you see. Thus, we have observed the trick of the pseudo-God complex, which we will illustrate in future episodes. As it pertains to the Tower of Babel in Scripture, my humble interpretation is that God did not actively cut off the physical language of the righteous people. Remember, Adam, mankind, is the Caucasian, he is the baby human of the earth, but he is wicked. God scattered the language and cut off the communication of Satan, so that he would not find and take hold of the knowledge of ultimate power over melanin people. However, Satan is the creator of this world with dominion over all nations of earth, which means that, via the law of cause and effect, all that God actively does to him will indirectly happen to us. There is God's active will, and then there is God's passive will. Our willful sins, which essentially means the conscious, willful act of morphing into God's arch-enemy and living contrary to the scientific and mathematical laws of nature, is what causes chaos in his divine harmony called life. Thus, God permits the derivative, passive destruction of the people he wants to save, because they will not submit to him in order to save themselves. Black people have, through their actions, willfully sided with the enemy of God, and essentially with the enemy of themselves. As always, however, there is the dualistic side to this interpretation of the destruction of language and the Tower of Babel. The derivative effect of Caucasian sin not only means the trickling down of the loss of physical language, but it also meant the destruction of the supernatural melanin sense called telepathy. One of the many consequences of the Black Aboriginals' fall from obedience to God. When it comes to the scripture of truth setting us free, we often interpret this as having true knowledge to set us free from the mental slavery of ignorance, but due to being oblivious to the actual depths of our slave state, we never learn to fractally apply this same concept in literal terms to the physical controlling of our limbs and actions through the psychological subjugation of hypnotism and witchcraft. To interpret this scripture in the most accurate, impeccable, and succinct way, I believe, it means that the state of mental hypnotic suggestion, which produces physical and psychological slavery, is induced by words. Therefore, the law of duality tells us that the way to correct and release this state is with the use of words as well. When it comes to decoding and dismantling the warfare system, the enemy claims that the system is too complex to fix in a reasonable amount of time, and therefore plants the mental seed, that if the system is too complex for even the so-called intellectual superiors of the world, then the so-called inherently inferior society will certainly have no hope in correcting it at all. This is only a tactic of false superiority that is used by any opponent in combat. The system is not too complex. All systems run on language. It is therefore language, more specifically trick language, that is the software engine of the system of white supremacy, sense distortion, and mental illusion. The scripture of faith coming by hearing means that you gain faith by hearing words. Words are spoken in a specific language. If faith comes by hearing language, then self-doubt and lack of confidence come by language as well. The trick is to make the so-called inferior society believe that they must know all the principles of some fragmented, false, and impractical area of rocket science in order to understand the basic concepts of building and governing a society. But Satan is the only author of confusion, not God. God has created the foundation of all things to be simple. It is only the enemy's book of illusions, along with his distorted sense perceptions of reality, which make it appear to be too complex to reconcile in terms of our own needs. This is why succinctness, impeccability, and speaking in plain language is most vital to defending against the enemy's binary warfare of truth, mixed with falsehood. This brings us to the binary language codes of white supremacy. As stated in episode 2, white supremacy is all about the psychobiological projection of the Neanderthal Caucasoid genotype. This is the secret to the system. It is the secret to human life today. It is the secret to this world and to this timeline of matter on which we exist. The biggest matter of this world is white supremacy and Caucasian genetic survival. Matter is defined as one body, substance extended, that which is visible or tangible as earth, wood, stone, air, vapor, water. 2. Affair, business, event, course of things. 3. The cause of any event, as of any disturbance of a disease or a difficulty. We must comprehend and understand the matter of life, which is the biggest truth. Reality, business, circumstance, an affair of this world. If white supremacy is the biggest matter of this world, then decoding this system is the route to decoding all phenomena. Caucasian genetic survival and biological resentment is the name of the secret map which illuminates the navigational pathway to avoid the snares of the enemy, as we pace through his valley of the shadow of death. That is a dual principle within itself. The entire Earth is walking through the collective causal dynamics of the white American government psyche, from which comes the brutal awareness of the imminent fall that is to betake it, all while the black individual must constantly walk through the threat of physical death from white's natural proclivity to psychopathic outbursts against melanin people. Nevertheless, we have now identified the secret code to what we call the matrix. Systems coding is part of the internal software of computers, which are physical I cannot see. All codes are forms of language, and white supremacy is a system created in the minds and language of the Caucasian human. The language mode of humans is words. It is only common sense that to reconcile the confusion of anything and to decode any system, we must go to the root. The system of silent warfare thus operates on the binary code of mental confusion, which is true mental data versus false mental data. Thus, let us break down the common-sense definition of the term confusion, that we may comprehend exactly what it is. Confusion equals con plus fusion. The term con means to do something deceptively. The term fusion means to mix two or more things together. Confusion, therefore, means to arrange binary data deceptively. We have learned by now that all systems are binary at the root. Therefore, we can logically deduce that the secret codes to the system of white supremacy are binary words or sentences which are false, yet reveal subtle truths about the enemy himself. We can observe that just as God whispers truth in the hearts of his people, Satan also whispers falsehood in the hearts of all men. Falsehood, however, is only one side of his binary code of language. He also whispers truth at the same time. We must remember that a serpent is fork-tongued. This is how he has effectually applied the neurodivergent symptom of dyslexia to the collective of society. As a child, dyslexia made reading and speaking particularly hard for me. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder that impacts language processing, which makes it difficult to decode written words and disrupts the fluidity of reading. For me, dyslexia transposed letters, and I struggled with phonemic awareness, as well as recognizing familiar words. This is why I often had disjointed reading. These same symptoms of dyslexia have been applied to the collective society, and Black society most especially. Often, I never really had any confidence to speak, because I didn't want to be embarrassed and perceived as stupid or mentally retarded. Confidence requires a feeling of safety and security in one's own survival, whether that be surviving an oral speech in front of many people or surviving a physical war. Everything requires a concrete understanding of the principles of whatever environment, profession, hobby, or area of people activity that one participates in. This includes understanding the basic principles of even the activity of communication. This is also why I often argued and debated in incorrect manners when I first came into knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The Black community is a dyslexic collective that is unable to coherently articulate and communicate because we don't have a crystallized, coherent understanding of the warfare environment in which we live. When it comes to language and communication, the compartmentalized components of abstract propositions have not been reconciled. We do not understand that we must always speak in terms of FBA genetic and biochemical survival, as well as economic survival and progression. We must understand contextual demarcation. To be correct is to have general truth, plus individual and environmental context. This is why the enemy distorts the patterns of language and communication. It is the trick of utilizing ambiguity and absence of full context. The defense to this trick, as stated, is therefore impeccability and specificity. This leaves no room for false interpretation and trickery. Now, let's get back to what common sense calls whispers of truth. This is when the enemy utilizes the binary code of language in which he mixes both truth and falsehood. This means mixing in the truth about the nature of himself and his tactics, the nature of melanin and Black people, and the nature of God. Being honest in subtle ways, as stated, is a key aspect of how he prolongs his karmic destiny of destruction. The specific combinations of truth and falsehood depend on the specific lie to be told. What the enemy says is almost always true, but simply incorrect in context. This ultimately means that his words are false, as any truth mixed with incorrectness is mathematically negated. The enemy knows this, which is why the causality of his direct opposition to the natural laws of this physical construct has quite literally caused him, his genetic bloodline, and his world of melanin slavery to come to the end of its karmic cycle. He knew that he could never have stopped his imminent fate. He could only prolong it by way of half-truths, which he collects as small increments of grace from the ultimate reconciler, which is God. When communicating and listening, we must treat language the same way that the government system of justice does, as its fundamentals provide the most authoritative standard for determining truth via structured processes. This is especially important when communicating with white supremacists and suspected white supremacists. When making an arrest, the officer reads the suspect their Miranda rights, which entails that every word that the suspect speaks will be held against them in the court of law. These words are used as evidence during the process of determining the truth and justness on how to handle the suspect. A process which is based on the correct standards of value, ethics, and morality. Although the justice system of America has actually proven to be quite the opposite of just and fair as it pertains to the Black people of America, the principle of utilizing exact wording for the process of reason is universally correct. The enemy hates impeccable articulation, as trick language is the operating code of his entire system of survival. Another concept of true justice is to treat a defendant as innocent until proven guilty. They are only considered as a suspect of white supremacy until it is proven that they are actually guilty of what they were being suspected of. Suspected white supremacists often show their frustration with the very use of the term suspected white supremacist when referring to those who show signs of racism towards melanin people. On the social media app called Twitter, now known as X, a user made a post about a suspected white supremacist who had demanded a Black student to give up his seat in school, to which many users, who were most likely suspected white supremacists themselves, responded by saying that they had no right to call the aggressor a white supremacist and that they should be sued for defamation. The user who made the post responded by pointing out the fact that he never called the aggressor a white supremacist. He called him a suspected white supremacist. The many users then resorted to nothing but name-calling and insults, as they could not find any logical way to combat or punish the user for his impeccability when speaking truth to their lies. Observing the exact words and speech of suspected white supremacists, or anyone in general, is vital to not only understanding correct context and finding the definitive truth inside their matrix of falsehood, but it is particularly vital because it also illustrates just how meticulous the enemy is in projecting his own insecurities and sly actions onto others, most of all the Black community. Among the cesspool of insults thrown by the white racists who responded to this impeccable speaker of truth, another user also responded, quote, "There is literally nobody suspecting him of being a white supremacist. You're simply trying to achieve two things with this disgusting disinformation campaign. 1. Clickbait for social media attention. 2. Influence future jurors to ensure a murderer walks free." Unquote. The enemy fully understands the principles of the law of duality and polarity. He knows that all the trick tactics that were used to build his economic system of subjugation and slavery, such as the clickbait and silent influence that the suspected white supremacist projected, are only pseudo-imitations of the Aboriginal principles used to sustain systems. So, he projects onto his victims by saying that they are doing the same exact thing he is. This is because technically we are. That statement is true. However, it is contextually incorrect, which makes it ultimately false. The enemy stole the fundamental principles of the Aboriginal melanin thought systems that we named mathematics and science, then turned all natural scales, in all areas of people activity, to the extreme opposite, and used it for wickedness. That is, trauma-based hypnotism and mind control. As far as projecting themselves onto others, let's take a look at the most common insults which racist white supremacists hurl at people of color. Nigga or nigger. Monkey. Bitch. Boy. Motherfucker. Punk. Asshole. Turd. Now, let's dissect this. A nigga, as we have dissected, is simply the engineered projection of Neanderthal. The animal which the Caucasian is most genetically spliced with is the monkey. A bitch is a female dog, which is what Neanderthals are also genetically spliced with, of whom was the companion of the Caucasian in the caves of Europe, and with which many Caucasians practice sexual bestiality. The term boy. denotes youth, naivety, and ignorance. Caucasians are the youngest human species on the planet with the least wisdom as compared to the trillions of years of Aboriginal knowledge. In fact, they aren't even considered boys or girls, they are the babies of the planet. A motherfucker is one who has sex with their mother. Black women, who are essentially the mothers of Caucasians, are the most missing demographic and highest among sex trafficking victims. Raping the black woman was also a hallmark of slavery. Not only this, but the Caucasian is a motherfucker to their parents of black people as a collective, by the continuous raping of their economic resources. Then we have the term punk. A punk is one who has no courage. The enemy is the biggest coward in all of history. Not only is he the physically weakest of all humans, but he is mentally weak in terms of destroying the world while he hides in his high-rise homes, private islands, and underground bunkers. Then there's the term asshole, which refers to the anus. The anus is pink on the inside, just as Caucasians are pink in color. The term turd refers to waste. The enemy is the parasite of the world which leeches off the resources of melanin people. Harmful parasites are considered waste organisms. Even Caucasians themselves, as reflected in their psychological dynamics of resentment, isolation, narcissism, etc., view their existence as waste products of the world. Moreover, another trick of language is the utilization of false synonyms and homophones. A synonym is a word that has the same or nearly the same meaning as another word, allowing for interchangeable use in similar contexts. A homophone is a word that sounds the same as another word but has a different meaning and often a different spelling, such as two, and two. The enemy deceitfully utilizes terms and words which have multiple definitions as a way to cause ambiguity and confusion. Thus, here is a list of trick synonyms and homophones most primarily used for black confusion. 1. Stupid versus unintelligent. This is the trick of false equivalency. Connotatively, the enemy has made the term stupid to mean inherently, idiopathically, and incurably impaired. Intelligence, in terms of senses, refers to the ability to perceive, interpret, and respond to sensory information effectively, enabling adaptive behavior and problem-solving in various environments. Thus, mentally retarded or stupid does not equal unintelligent. To be retarded or stupid simply means to learn slowly. To be unintelligent simply means to be reduced in sensory perception. 2. Impulse versus instinct. Instinct is an innate, typically fixed pattern of behavior in animals and humans, driven by natural impulses that guide actions without the need for conscious thought or learning. Impulse is a sudden, strong urge or desire to act, often without careful consideration of the consequences, typically driven by emotions or instinctual reactions. Impulse refers to a spontaneous urge to act, often based on emotions, while instinct is an innate, automatic behavior that occurs in response to specific stimuli. The enemy paints blacks as being overly impulsive and inherently bad. But the traumatic stimulation of instincts, which causes the triggering of impulses, is the true root of disorder. 3. Man versus mankind. Man is the aboriginal human being of eumelanin. Mankind is the Caucasian, who is a kind of man mixed with animal and/or reptilian DNA. 4. Nigga versus black man or woman. Nigga is the name of the pseudo-Caucasian genotype and phenotype that has been physically and mentally engineered into melanated people. It is a term that is also used to describe all other dark people of melanin as well, but it was originated by the American history of black slavery. Niggas are black people who possess the pseudo-mindset and false psychological conditioning of the Caucasian. A regular black man-woman is a human being who is not a nigga, meaning that although they may still possess some physical traits of Caucasians due to slavery, modern interracial breeding, and chemical warfare, they do not possess the conditioned pseudo-mind of Caucasians. 5. Separation versus segregation. Separation means economic independence from the black subjugation system of white supremacy. It means to be separate, but equal in terms of freedom and rights. Segregation means separate and unequal in terms of freedom and rights. Segregation implies that one community must be economically exploitative and dominant over the other. The enemy distorts the meaning of separation to mean segregation, in order to deter the economic separation and unity of the foundational Black American. 6. Symbiosis versus integration. Symbiosis is the harmonious unity of separate, yet equal entities working together in unity. Integration in this capitalistic society means the complete takeover of the economic foundation of FBAs and the distortion of true FBA culture due to false claims of ownership over Black inventions and Black culture. It is due to parasitic invasion. The enemy claims that Blacks are equal to the rest of society, but there can be no equality in the centralized capitalistic system of white supremacy integration. There must always be a ruler, and there must always be a slave. 7. Originator versus innovator. An originator is the earliest initiator to produce a creation from their mind and into existence. An innovator is a customizer who makes changes and updates to the original creation. The enemy never originates. He only innovates. Along with trick synonyms, we also have the trick homophones. A list of trick homophones includes 8. Disease versus disease. Disease is the uneasiness of mind or body. Disease only requires basic correction of natural bodily functions by utilizing the free and abundant hospital of nature. The other disease is the false label placed on disease, which falsely claims that most, if not all disease is either too idiopathic to cure at all or too complex to cure without inflicting the most extreme forms of trauma, such as chemical poisons. Radiation, laceration and mutilation, dismemberment, evisceration, electric shock, icepick lobotomy, etc. The most useless, life-threatening treatments which often make disease worse are yet the most expensive. 9. God versus God. God is the single supreme being with infinite force and power over all worlds. A god, lowercase g, is a human being with force and power. The enemy claims to worship God, the one supreme being, but he secretly worships his own god of white supremacy, which is the devil. 10. Racist versus racist. The suffix ist, indicates a person who practices, specializes in, or adheres to something, such as a pianist, violinist, lyricist, or vocalist. Thus, the term racist essentially means a person who practices, specializes in, or adheres to the well-being of their race and kind. It implies no dominant power to affect the livelihood of others. The term racist has been fragmented to differentiate from the more commonly known meaning of the unfragmented term called racist. To be racist is to not only have racial bias and discrimination towards a specific race, but it more correctly means to have the power to economically and militarily enforce those biases over the practical lives of others and cause tangible effects on the livelihoods of the race that one is biased toward. To be racist is to have bias along with power. The enemy loves to project claims of racism onto all his victims. FBAs can be, and should be racist, but it is currently impossible for them to be racist. Even if all FBAs were to unite today, it would still take over 2 centuries to close the racial wealth gap between black and white, let alone gain the ability to exert power over any other group. 11. Melanin versus melanin. Pheomelanin is a type of melanin that provides a yellow to red color in hair, skin, and eyes. It is commonly found in lighter hair shades and is associated with pigmentation in individuals with a higher concentration of red or blonde tones. Eumelanin is the more common form of melanin, producing a range of colors from brown to black. It plays a key role in determining the darkness of hair and skin pigmentation, providing protection against UV radiation, and more. Most importantly, eumelanin is the apparatus of supernatural ability and spiritual perception. Caucasians often assert that they have melanin, but they only possess pheomelanin, not supernatural eumelanin. 12. Black versus black. Foundational Black American is the most impeccable and correct term for Black Americans, which means any Black person who can trace their bloodline descent and lineage to the victims of the American system of chattel human slavery. It is a lineage, not an organization or a cult. The other term Black is ambiguous and entails any person of pigmented melanin. It is the socio-political identity placed on the aboriginal, copper-colored humans of America and all other nations, regardless of ethnicity. Thus, FBAs are still Black. The enemy engineers confusion by intentionally mingling FBAs with the diaspora of melanated people, in order to curtail the cultural and economic independence of the foundational Black American. 13. White versus white. A Caucasian is one whose genetic origination traces back to Europe and the Caucasus Mountains. White is a socio-political identity of primarily Caucasians, but which even Africans, Hispanics, Asians, and others can legally and officially classify as. This distorts the true populace statistics and makes whites seem greater in number than they actually are. Even today, as most do not know, many non-Caucasian immigrants legally identify as white. This is also why many white Gentiles often get offended when comparing whites to European Jewish people, so as to say that they are not the same people. The enemy often exerts that there is a difference between whites and Caucasian Jews, but it would more accurately be said that there is a difference between Jews and Gentiles. The correct wording would be that European whites and European Jewish people are both Caucasian in genetic origin, and therefore are still white. 14. Native versus native. Native is a broader term that refers to individuals or groups who are originally from a particular place, encompassing various indigenous populations around the world, not limited to one specific region. Aboriginal means the earliest indigenous people to exist in and inhabit a land before the arrival of colonists. A colonizer is an individual or group that establishes control over a foreign territory, often settling there and asserting dominance over the local population through political, economic, and cultural means. This process typically involves the exploitation of resources and may lead to the displacement and subjugation of indigenous peoples. Caucasians have asserted claim and dominance over every land they've colonized and often posture themselves as natives, but the Caucasian is not native or aboriginal to any land on Earth, as they were not naturally made. They are therefore colonizers everywhere they go. 15. Invent versus invent. To invent means to create or devise something new that has not existed before, often involving original thought or innovation. To curate refers to the process of selecting, organizing, and presenting existing items, such as artworks or information, to create a coherent collection or experience. Though he has made a few legitimate inventions, the enemy hardly ever invents. He only steals patents of original inventions and curates or innovates them. 16. World versus world. A world is the ethos, egregore, propaganda, and culture of a particular area which is based on the subjective needs of the governing entity. Reality is objective truth, existence, and actuality of that which is. The enemy asserts his world, which is a curated, unnatural reality, as the ultimate reality, while asserting ultimate reality or natural reality as an unnatural world. 17. Owner versus owner. An owner is the sole possessor of property and rights. An agent acts on behalf of the owner, such as a sales agent, talent agent, broker, or spy agent. The enemy often plays the trick of false black ownership by falsely posturing black agents as black owners in order to curtail true black economic progression. 18. True versus true. To be true is to be in accordance with fact. Generalities are true only when leaving out context and exceptions. Correctness is being true generally as well as contextually. The enemy presents true information that is overly generalized and mixed with falsehood. Therefore, it is ultimately false and incorrect. There is a difference between being true and being correct. This is only a brief list of the cesspool of tricks, synonyms, and homophones that the enemy utilizes. Thus, in conclusion, the code language of computers is what prevents the infiltration of viruses and hackers. The binary code language of the enemy is what prevents the leaking of his tactical intel and thus prevents the infiltration and/or destruction of his system. Hypnotic suggestion and commands. The mental slave state. Binary codes of confusion. Whispers of truth. Trick synonyms. Trick homophones. And more are all utilized as the firewall to secure his system. Essentially, therefore, the correctness of language and the manner of speech that his slaves utilize is what will dismantle the firewall of illusion. There are many ways to interpret language. This includes scientifically, literally, historically, allegorically, metaphysically, metaphorically, or prophetically. The enemy's language includes projections of his biological self, projections of his historical self, mixed truth of the black biological self, melanin, God, nature, and the universe. To psychologically program the mind is to use an unnaturally tuned frequency of language. To psychologically deprogram the mind, therefore, is to use the correct tune of language frequency.